All right, what we're looking at with the Temple of Hera is a peripteral temple, which means that there is a single colonnade, this single row of columns that goes around the entire perimeter of this large stylobate here. This is that kind of flat marble foundation for the temple. And of course, today the interior is missing. So I don't want anybody to think, oh, this is just a kind of open porch here. The columns in Greek architecture follow what we call the classical order and the classical orders. And again, I suggest that you pause this slide and write down some of the key vocabulary from the parts of the temple up here, and then also not all of it, but just some of the key vocabulary here from the orders. Now, the Temple of Hera is the oldest Greek order. That's called Doric, and that's what we see here. What we see is the capital of the column is just a flat disc. There's no base, so the shaft just sits straight here on the stylobate. As we move into the High Classical period, this is the era of a lot of classical Greek philosophers, writers, thinkers that we are familiar with still today. Hippocrates, Socrates, Sophocles, Euripides. And important for us is the ruler of Athens, a man named Pericles. What happens in Athens, and this is so important to understand the Parthenon, is that Athens is destroyed during a war with the Persian Empire. The Persians come in, they destroy the temples, and they destroy the Acropolis, this hill in the center of Athens that contained the most important sacred sites. So Pericles says, we need to rebuild the Acropolis, and he raises taxes to do this. He received a lot of political opposition, but he went ahead anyways. We know this today, right? When people want to raise taxes to build things, it's very contentious. But he also used money from the treasury that all of these different Greek city-states used. And so he kind of took some money on the side to pay for this enormous rebuilding cost of the apocalypse. We often think of ancient Greece as the birthplace of democracy. This is a much more complicated story. Pericles was really a tyrant. This is not the result of democratic decisions, but really of one megalomaniac who was calling all of the shots. We also see when we have the building records that have survived from the rebuilding of the Acropolis, and we see what it would have looked like here in its heyday on the left, and the building accounts show us that it was not free workers who built a lot of the Acropolis. Again, this was not a democracy perhaps in the way that we think of it today, but instead there were slaves, forced labor, forced foreign workers, and also free citizen workers who were all employed at the Acropolis. All right, the centerpiece, this building here, what we see over here today, that is the Parthenon. It is a Doric order peripteral temple on a three-step platform, that three-step stylobate. And you've all seen the clip from Nova about all of these amazing technical refinements that were added into the design of the Parthenon. The way the columns bulge slightly in the center to make the lines appear straighter. The way the stylobate curves upwards in the center to compensate for the illusion of a sag. Where we look at this building here and we say, oh, it looks symmetrical, it looks very geometric. What we actually find is that there's no line that is completely straight. There's no angle that is completely square here. Why bother with all of these little technical tweaks? It makes the building appear more organic and light, as if it is holding its weight without any effort. Now, we also have to think about, okay, well, what did the Parthenon look like originally? Um, Even though we love all of this pure white marble, all of the stone that we see would have been brightly painted. And the interior that's gone here, that would have held this huge statue of Athena, the patron goddess of Athens. This is Athena Parthenos, and she is a gold and ivory statue of Athena that we know from descriptions that the Romans gave us of the Parthenon. 38 feet tall, 2 stories tall, would have been painted, clad in gold, maybe even a little bit tacky by our standards, but it was par for the course in ancient Greece. Now, the Romans were huge lovers of ancient Greece. When we see the Roman Empire emerge in the decades right before the year 0, they seek to emulate Greece in its architecture. They actually adapt the same gods in their own worship. And and we're going to see a lot of parallels here in the art and architecture of Rome. And this is, of course, not the last time we're going to talk about ancient Greece and ancient Rome in class. This is going to come up in other modules, and something that we always need to be thinking about is this connection between Greece and Rome, and how the Romans just wanted to emulate the Greeks and really saw themselves as their ancestors. This is a picture of the Roman Empire in the 1st century after the year 0. And you can see it spanned the entire circumference here of the Mediterranean. All shores of the Mediterranean were part of Rome. It even extended out into West Asia here, north into present-day England, and at the center of it is the capital of Rome, of course. And I think the best way to approach Roman architecture is to look at one of its iconic monuments, the Pantheon that we see here on the left. The Pantheon still stands today in Rome. And then we're looking at the Parthenon here on the right. And I encourage you all just to make sure in your notes you are very clear about the names. Sometimes I'll see people refer to the Parthenon or the Parthenon, and I'm not sure if they mean the Pantheon or the Parthenon. So just make sure you're keeping that straight in your head. Now the Pantheon, this is pan, means all. Theon comes from theos, God. This is a temple dedicated to all of the gods in the Roman Pantheon, as opposed to here the Parthenon, which is dedicated specifically to the patron god of Athens, who is Athena. What we see here in the Pantheon, another key difference, is this is a round building, not the rectangular cella that we see in the Greek Parthenon. What are some similarities, though? I think the exterior here, we see that connection. I mean, the entrance to the rotunda of the Pantheon, it looks like a Greek temple front with these classical ordered columns and that triangular pediment above, just like what we see here on the Pantheon. Or the Parthenon. Oh my gosh, now I'm mixing them up. So here I am, just completely mind blown, having the time of my life. I got to visit the Pantheon in December, actually shortly before the pandemic. I'm so grateful to have had that opportunity. And boy, is it spectacular to stand in that rotunda. This is another big difference between Greek and Roman architecture. The Romans are master engineers, so they're not just making do with post and lintel construction that we see over here with those horizontal supports here in the roof atop these vertical supports of the columns. You need big, thick columns to support all of those heavy horizontal beams. Instead, the Romans develop a completely new system, abandoning post and lintel. And we can see it here in the diagram on the top left, where the walls of the Pantheon are very thick here at the bottom to support an arching roof structure that creates this big domed roof. And what do they do in the middle? They take out the center so that it is an open air oculus here in the middle. And so when you're in the Pantheon today, if it's raining outside, it's raining on you in the Pantheon. Now, some of you engineers in class, you might be looking at this and thinking, well, how on earth, okay, so the walls are thick, that helps, but how on earth is this roof actually supported? Wouldn't it just collapse in on itself as it's trying to span this huge interior? And the Romans are also using a new building material to help them with this engineering feat. That new material seems very humble today, but it's concrete. Concrete has a huge advantage over stone. It's cheap. You can create molds for concrete in any shape and form instead of spending all of this time quarrying, cutting, carving stone to fit these exact shapes. And concrete is lighter. So this big, massive dome is made of concrete. You can also see they also include here these square cutouts. These are called coffers, these square carved out impressions. The coffers create this beautiful geometric pattern, but they're also helping with the weight of the building. They're taking out a little bit of weight of the in the roof, and so that you're left with this big, open, expansive space, very different than the close supports here in the Parthenon. All right, I think I'm going to stop this video here. And when we come back, we are going to turn to the ancient Americas before we move to Asia.